Well,
And
it's flavour, texture, and temperature. That is just those three things. You know, that's and like at Noma, they served us this brain custard, and I don't mind eating brain custard. It's fine. Give me a brain custard, but it was grainy. The texture was grainy. It was a horrible texture, and it's like, fine, make a brain custard, but your job, Noma, the best restaurant in the world, is to make it delicious, and you have failed at that.
Yeah, as I said to you before we hit record, it was very serendipitous. As we were talking about status, the Rory Sutherland. He brought up your book. That was the week you went on to Rogan, and then it all the stars kind of aligned. So look, I'm incredibly grateful to chat to you today, mate.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Dan. It's great to be here. Thank you.
So I want to start with, I think, as I say, is food podcast. It would be remiss of me not to start with The Hunger and the Howling of Killian Lone. And I'd love, as I said, I've read a lot of your books, and the storytelling piece and how we relate to main characters and protagonists is something that really fascinates me. So I'd love to know, is in the writing process of The Hunger and the Howling of Killian Lone, how did you relate to the main character yourself? How did you relate to Killian?
Well, the book was inspired by a story I did as a journalist. I was living in Australia for like 3 or 4 years and working as a journalist. And as I did for a story, there was a Michelin sort of level restaurant in the Sydney Opera House that was run by a chef called Guillaume Brahimi, who trained under, I forget who it is exactly now. It was a long time ago, but he trained under one of the kind of French monsters, you know, like the old school hardcore. And Guillaume Brahimi was like legendarily tough, like a really old school, you know, so I spent 3 or 4 days working as a stage in his kitchen. And it was just absolutely terrifying, you know. I can still hear him in my head at one point going, "Where's the fucking duck? Where's the fucking duck?" Like him just over and over there, "Where's the fucking duck?" And then at the end, people were saying, "Oh my God." Like, and I was saying, "God, that was terrifying." And people were saying he put on special performance for you. Like, he was so much nicer. Like, we've never seen him so nice. And I just thought, bloody hell. But the thing about that shift was that that few days was just, I just was absolutely intoxicated by it. Even though it was incredibly hard work and I was, you know, peeling vegetables, I was like doing the proper grunt work. Obviously, I had no skills. I remember cycling back home at like 2:30 in the morning after my first shift and waking up my fiance, or my wife, she was my girlfriend at the time, not yet my fiance, and just talking to her. Like I just absolutely loved it. And there was, I mean, I guess must be doing 28, 29 at the time. But I promise you, if I'd have had that experience at 18, I'd be a chef right now because it was addictive. It was just like I loved it, you know. And so that's why I ended up writing a novel. Really, it was almost to get it out of my system. Like I just became obsessed with that whole world of Michelin star chefs. That whole it was just like the kind of brutal meritocracy of it. It was like, you know, no one gave a fuck who you were, what your background was, even what your name was. You could either do it or you couldn't do it. And if you could do it, you were in. If you couldn't do it, you were out of the door in seconds. And I think another apprentice got fired whilst I was there. She was just out. You know, and just the whole process of beginning the day bleary-eyed and everyone's together and you've got these boxes of incredible products coming in. And over the course of that day, those products get turned into the most incredible dishes. Like absolutely, I remember one of the things I was working on was this tuna appetizer starter, which was like wrapped in these basil leaves. And I had to pick the basil leaves, but I had to pick them in a special way where you kind of had to put it. You put the very base of the basil leaf between your thumbnail and your fingertip and press it. You know, it was a very specific way of cooking. You know, they were that insane, and it was just like this magical alchemy. You know, this kind of alchemy of the boxes turning up at fucking 8 a.m. whenever it was, and then you've just got this building pressure, and then the service. And I'm going on about it now because I loved it so much. And so that's where the book came from. Really, I was just became obsessed with this whole world after doing that story.
we're going to get onto the book and the storytelling piece, but I used to work for. I was basically the runt who used to deliver. I used to when I left uni, I had no fucking idea what I was doing. I was like, right, I'm going to go and work for a cheese wholesaler as a man in a van. And ironically, it gave me a bit of time because I could basically listen to loads of podcasts. This was 6-7 years ago, so it actually kind of did work out. But I remember seeing the underbelly of the Ritz in London and delivering cheese, and I was like, this is fucking insane. I was like, this is just so wild. And you see in the Ritz, and if you ever get the joy to go down to the kitchen, you can just see the meritocracy and really? Actually the status. Because the head chef's a guy called John Williams actually. But then what I think why I love food so much, especially kitchens, and I've interviewed loads of chefs on this podcast, is you have the status and the meritocracy, but then that turns into storytelling, and what the end consumer gets. Pretty much every chef I've spoken to, is they say the plate of food is in a way some sort of story that's coming from their soul. So even though they're like these ironclad fist kind of pumping chefs, there's a story in there as well. So I'd love to know. So that's kind of your time in Australia is where you kind of got that addiction to the high octane, high pressure environment. How did you, because what you say in the science of storytelling is that we relate to our main characters in some respect. How did you relate to Killian Lone? Like, I think you say who we are is how we're broken. Like, how was Killian Lone in that some respect broken, and how were you kind of maybe broken in that way as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Dan. That's a really quite profound question, really. I suppose. So Killian's character is broken in the sense that he has a very unhappy relationship with his mother. In the novel, she's actively abusive. My parents weren't actively abusive, but it wasn't a happy, loving, childhood, and that is really the fuel that. The Killian Lone is a tragedy. Like I should tell you the premise really. So he's this. It's set in the 80s, in the kind of birth of the beginnings of the Nouvelle Cuisine era, where Nouvelle Cuisine was taking over from the old French style of the heavy sauces and the butters and the creams, and it's the early days of the celebrity chef. It's that it is very inspired by reading about Marco at Harvey's and all that kind of era, and he is desperate to be successful. His brokenness makes him incredibly ambitious. He has to prove himself, and he's got this beloved aunt that dies and lives in this cottage in the middle of nowhere in Wales. And he finds out that his ancestor was a cook for the local king, hundreds of years ago. And he finds this abandoned herb garden with all these kind of forgotten herbs, and one of the herbs in it has these kind of semi-magical properties that is just almost addictive. And he finds out that his ancient ancestor was actually sort of burnt as a witch at the stake, and he starts using this herb as a cook, and ends up becoming this, the first, really not the first famous chef, but one of the early kind of big celebrity chefs. And of course, because he cheats, he ends up, getting his comeuppance in quite a big way. So that's really the story. As I say, it is a fairy story. It's it's a fairy tale. It's kind of magical realism. But it's really a book about ambition, really, and about when ambition can go too far, and when ambition can become corruptive. And in the end, and to answer your question, I think what I feel I have in common with Killian in the novel is that sense of the ambition comes from being made to feel like a failure by your parents a lot, being made to feel like you're a loser, you're never going to get it. Well, my parents used to tell me I was going to end up in prison, I don't end up in care, I was going to end up on the streets. That was the relentless message I got from my mum and dad when I was growing up. So I think that's what I've got in common with him.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Honestly, means the absolute world to me. I'd be so grateful for a small favour, please. It is so hard growing a YouTube channel. It is so bloody hard. If you please enjoy these videos, just click the subscribe button.
more subscribers equals bigger guests equals better conversations, and hopefully you can learn more as you build your food and drink brand. Thank you so much.
There's a quote by Gordon Ramsay which I love, which is the velocity of jeopardy, and it's basically, he talks about, he had a kind of really harsh upbringing, was a failed footballer, didn't make it into Rangers, but that kind of setback gave him this, as he says, the velocity of jeopardy. And why I related to your work so much, and it's kind of been because I feel all those things. I've got a very good relationship with my parents, but school just predicted me just to do shit, basically. And it gave me this neurotic, maniacal kind of drive with this podcast and everything I've done. But then even in the last, when I was reading your books, like I was thinking, why am I actually doing this when I go to the deeper surface level? Is this like, because this is just a bit nuts, like how obsessed I am with it. But I think what you said, that's when ambition goes too far and corrupt. And that's something I haven't actually talked about a lot, because especially in this kind of selfie status driven world we're in now, is it feels like today, and I was just thinking this in the gym, if you're not wearing a Whoop, if you're not doing a 10k fucking run, if you're not doing an ice bath, like the level of perfectionism is so up here now than like never before, that you're just constantly made to feel like if you're not banging out a 10k run before you've had your Cocoa Pops, that you're an idiot. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
which is crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I was always interested in that Gordon Ramsay kind of, foundation story of it being a failed footballer, because as I'm sure you know, he was a great enemy of A.A. Gill, who was a big hero of mine in the early
I love A.A. Gill.
Once threw Gill out of his restaurant and all that stuff. But Gill was the same. I think Gill was it football, but Gill was he a failed artist? But they both had that same thing where they felt like in their early life they felt like they'd failed, and Ramsay had been given this another chance to succeed in another sphere, and so did Gill as a writer. I think Gill was a failed painter. And they both had the same thing where they just thought, shit, like I thought I'd failed, but I've got one more chance. And they both kind of ran at it with everything. And not that I would ever compare myself to Gordon Ramsay or A.A. Gill, but I had the same thing. I failed all my exams at school. I had an alcohol problem in my 20s. While all my friends at uni, I was working in a shop, and I felt I'd failed too, and then got the chance in my mid-20s to write for a national magazine. And it was that thing of, fuck, like, I don't believe in God, but like God's given me one more chance not to be a fuck up. So it's that, like, shit, like this is it now. I've either got to do this or I'm done. So yeah, I ran at it with everything. And I think you do see it in the influencer sphere. Like, I'm sure you're aware there's been a recent set of cancels about YouTubers sort of plagiarizing, people, and it's all these super ambitious. I think wherever you get a status game, a sphere where people can earn plenty of status, you're always going to get that kind of crust of people who want it a bit too much and push it a bit too far.
Yeah, and also I think the A.A. Gill thing's really interesting, because his book, he's got that book Poor Me, which is spelled P-O-U-R. It's one of the best kind of autobiographies I've ever. His writing style and his prose is just it's electric. Because I write every day. Like the podcast I write a weekly newsletter all about kind of food and brands and stuff. But I feel like writing for me is this kind of it takes a lot of this force that's in my head, which is just loads of busy thoughts, and it kind of takes that negative and like flushes it into something positive, which is ultimately what's on the page. I'd love to know, what does writing do for you? Like, on a really deeper level, what does it do for you? How's it useful?
Oh God. Well, that's another sort of really big question. So, I mean, of course, I've written a book about status. It's my status game. Is writing. It's what I do to feel like I have value in the world. It's what I do to feel like I'm quite good at something, and it's something to always throw yourself out. Like, I always feel like there's a lot of space to become a lot better at it. So I'm always trying to become better at it. But it's also it's most of my identity, I would say. I'm not a parent. I'm not a footballer. I'm not a artist. I'm not a musician. Almost all of what I am is a writer. So it's given me a functional life to live.
I think what you said there about it being an identity is so interesting, and I thought one thing I'd love to know, and this is I'm asking for my own kind of personal help here, or very selfishly, is how to separate your status and worth from your work. Like, do you see what I mean? Because it's like,
yeah.
I don't know how to do that, and it's and then this book's maybe been thinking a lot, mate. I've been doing a lot of walks. I'm thinking, is my only identity this fucking podcast? Is this it's these deeper questions? But how did you navigate that?
Well, I mean, so I guess just sort of contextually to explain kind of how it works and how being a human works. And humans, like every other animal, we live in a realm of pure survival where we are programmed to seek food and water and shelter and defend ourselves when we're attacked. And in this way, we're like every other animal that's ever existed, and then we're also like the plants. We're not particularly special. But what makes us special is that we also live in this story world. We live in a narrative world, a world in which we are. Not flesh and blood, but we're an identity. We're a concept that exists in our mind and in the minds of the people that we share our lives with. And that's our identity. And for human beings, your identity is pretty much everything. I mean, once you've taken care of survival, our identity is the most valuable thing we own. Our identity is worth more than gold. I mean, our identity is worth more than life. People kill themselves when their identity is destroyed. People kill themselves when their identity is starved of its essential nutrients, which is basically connection to other people and status in the world. So especially in this individualist neoliberal Western environment, which is sort of based a lot around success-based status, part of your identity is always going to be what you do for a living. If you do something for a living, and especially if it's something you care about, if it's something that you get status from, it is going to be a component part of your identity. Which, of course, as you kind of hint towards, it puts you at a risk, because if your podcast, something goes wrong with it, or if it stops being successful, then you stop being successful as a person, and that's just a reality. That's just how your identity works. The more connection and status that your job provides you, the more central it is to your identity. And I think the way to protect yourself from that is to play multiple status games. So to have more than one important source of status in your life. Now, you're a young man at your age. I don't know if I would even recommend that too strongly, because I think in your 20s and 30s, you're building the rest of your life. If you nail it in your 20s and 30s, your 40s and 50s and 60s are going to be much easier, because by the time you're 40, you'll be someone in the world, even more than you are now. So I would say that you're probably doing it all right at the moment. You've got a successful podcast. You're making a success of it. You're learning how to do something. So, but I think is when you hit 40 and 50, that's when you need to start hedging. You need to start playing different status games. So that would be my recommendation. You need to have sort of multiple parts of your identity rather than just one.
Because we talked about, you were saying like a big part of my status and identity is Will Storr the writer. What are some of the other games you've put in place to kind of detach or put all your eggs in the Will Storr writer basket, if that makes sense?
I mean, the big one is I joined the Samaritans. So like I volunteer for the Samaritans now, the charity, the crisis hotline. So people who phone up when they're in distress, they're often suicidal. So that's the major thing I did. I realized that I'm just playing these success games, and there's no, the other big way that humans earn status with success and competence, but also with virtue, with offering something virtuous to the world. So I thought I should try and play a virtue game too. So I joined the Samaritans a couple of years ago, and yeah, so that's now become another part of my identity. That's something, when I'm at the Samaritans, I'm not a writer. I don't feel like a writer. I feel like a different version of me. So that's something else that I do, which has now become a big part of my life. I mean, you have to do sort of 4 hours a week minimum at the Samaritans. So it's a big investment of time.
Is there anything else you do? Because I'm just thinking people listening to this who basically see their brand or their business as them to the point where, as we said, it becomes corruptive or unhealthy. That ambition. Is there anything else you've implemented?
Well, I think the other important thing is connection. I mean, I've written a whole book about status, but equally important is that we feel connected to other people. And actually, that's surprisingly what I've found also with Samaritans. When you're on a call with somebody, there are lots of strict rules in place. You're not allowed to talk about yourself. They call it self-disclosure. You're there for the call and not for you. So you're allowed to tell them your name, but that's about if you want to, but that's about it. But even despite that, I find that you have these extremely profound conversations with people. You're there by their side, really going into their kind of story world at some of the worst points in their life. And before I joined the Samaritans, despite the fact I'm happily married, I felt quite lonely. I didn't have much of a social life, and I don't feel lonely anymore. When I've had a shift, I feel connected. I feel connected into the human world in some sort of profound and important way. So that's one thing. I mean, another thing which is a bit more facile is I've joined CrossFit. So and again, I found that is that was partly just for vanity because when you get to my age, you start getting a middle-aged spread, and it's just horrifies me. So I just didn't want that. But again, I found that the unexpected gift of CrossFit. And actually, the thing that keeps me going there is that I really enjoy the communal aspect of it, just sort of being there and going through almost like a shift in a kitchen, going through hell together. It has an incredibly kind of bonding effect.
Yeah, I think it's what I love what you said there is there can be, I think, I don't know what I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, mate, but there's one when you said there's almost infinite status games, which is really reassuring for type A, neurotic, hyper ambitious people, is you can create either something deep and meaningful, i.e. the Samaritans, or something kind of, which I still think is pretty profound, is the CrossFit, but any kind of connection, I think, a lot of people now are kind of joining these running clubs, but there are these other games you can play that isn't your main thing. You talked about
you see a lot of chefs, don't you? The missions are chefs get involved with stupid running, and that they become super athletic and do 18 marathons, and that's something. It's something that they're so competitive that they have to.
North Star, get listed, say listed, and grow. Do you actually know your shopper? If you don't know your shopper, you're literally pissing and spunking money up the wall. Knowing your shopper is the secret weapon to unlock more grocery listings and more stores. But not knowing your shopper is literally like driving in the dark, hungover, without a sat-nav, in a thunderstorm, in February with 5 miles of petrol in the tank. But knowing your shopper is like having a sat-nav. A full tank of petrol. It's a glorious sunny day. You're listening to the Sugar Babes and you've got a fresh, hot pumpkin spice latte by your side. North Star Illuminator is the shopper map to the promised land of growth and success. It does 3 wonderful things for your brand. 1, make your marketing budget sweat. When you've got lucid, crystal clarity on exactly where each precious penny is going, you know how to drive loyalty with existing customers or even bring new shoppers into your brand. Numero 2, what's actually driving performance? Do you actually know why your sales are going up and down? You need to know, are you bringing new shoppers into the category? Is that driving growth? Are loyal customers buying more of your brand? Are shoppers switching in and out of your brand versus other brands? I mean, Perfect Head's a glorious example. They are bringing new shoppers into sports and energy. They are so incremental versus, say, chocolate bars, where people just switch in and out of brands all the time. The more you know this, the more oomph you've got with your buyer when you go to do a marketing plan, a joint business plan with retailers. The buyers want to know how incremental you are to the category. That is your passport to success. North Star is your passport. And what you can do is you can literally see it by channel, by retailer, get so specific. If you're looking to go to the next level, honestly, get in touch with North Star and go to the promised land. Delighted to announce the extension of our partnership with the wonderful Billy and Paul from Mackenzie Jones, but even more exciting, they have just launched a brand new brand as part of Mackenzie Jones called MKJ Ignite. MKJ Ignite is a recruitment firm which specializes full shebang focus entirely on challenge brand space. They work with some incredible brands: Lucky Saint, Goodrays, Purdy and Fig, Hunt and Gather, and Real Superfoods. They can support with your hiring needs across all levels, top to bottom, junior entry-level jobs, all the way through up to MD and CEO level. So if you're looking for a field sales stomper, a sales wizard, an ops guru, a supply chain sensei, you name it, MKJ Ignite can help you out. And look, if you're looking to wet your whistle, ignite your curiosity, then check out the poddy we recorded with them back in July, laden with wisdom, all about like do's and don'ts of hiring and like how to create the perfect job description. You will love it. I'm obsessed with the chefs. Like, I think they're the most interesting, some of the most interesting characters I've ever met. Yeah. Like, trying to think, I interviewed Paul Ainsworth, who's down in Cornwall. Tommy Banks, who's up north. He was his velocity of jeopardy is he was meant to be a cricketer. Not meant to be a cricketer. It wasn't like some divine intervention. You were going to play in the Ashes, but he got this disease when he was 18, and he couldn't. He had this bug or something that meant he was bedridden for 18 months. Couldn't get out of bed, but all he did was watch cookery programs, and then he came out swinging, and that was his velocity of jeopardy, and he won fucking Great British Menu, and he's now a huge Michelin star chef. But I love that addictive part to them, and I definitely have that kind of addictiveness in me. You talked about so you're working in this shop, you're in your 20s, your parents basically said, look, we don't think you're going to account to much, if that's the nicest way of putting it. Yeah. You talk about in fact first I'd love to know what character best do you relate to the most out of all the fiction books you've read, resembles you in that period, in that kind of in the wilderness period for Will Storr, getting back on your feet?
I think probably the character in fiction I've most ever related to is a character called Arturo Bandini. In that there was a writer, John Fante, who was writing in mid-century 20th century in Los Angeles, and I just fell in love with Arturo Bandini. I was reading him at the same age, and he was a character who was desperately trying to be a writer. He was thinly disguised. He was John Fante was basically writing autobiography, but just changing his name, very briefly. And his most famous novel is Ask the Dust, and it's about his kind of doomed obsession, kind of love obsession with this Mexican waitress that who just wanted nothing to do with him because he was a lunatic. And I think that's the character that I most. He had like me. He had a Catholic upbringing, and his Catholic guilt and Catholic, worries around sex and love and all these kind of hang-ups and just the kind of desperation and the craziness. And it's just a beautiful book. One of my prized possessions that I've got. When he finished his manuscript, he wrote a long letter to send to his agent saying, "This is my novel," and it was such a great letter that you can now buy it, or you for a time there is a limited edition book, and I think it begins that he says, I didn't need to write a plot for this, my second novel. I loved her and she hated me, and that is my story. And it's like, just the brutal simplicity of that. I just absolutely, I absolutely loved it. So yeah, probably Arturo Bandini is the character that I've most related to.
What's books that in? Sorry, because I read loads. I just find I'm being very selfish here. I just find this interesting.
That's right. So the most famous one is called Ask the Dust. But there's a book that came before that called The Road to Los Angeles, which I prefer actually. I think it's because The Road to Los Angeles, Ask the Dust is this kind of brutal, doomed love book. But The Road to Los Angeles is similar, but it's also very funny. It has lots of comedy, there's lots of humor in The Road to Los Angeles. So I like that one. And of course, Charles Bukowski, who is much more famous than John Fante, was hugely inspired by Fante to the extent where Bukowski was worried, because I think when Fante died, there was a little resurgence in interest in him, and Bukowski was worried that Fante was going to become famous because then everyone would know where he'd stolen all these tricks from. So yeah, Bukowski is hugely influenced by Fante, and they're both published by the Black Sparrow Press. So yeah, if you like Bukowski, you'll love Fante.
Because he wrote Post Office, didn't he? I've read that. I think the way that the disregard for like, I can't remember the main character's name, but there's sort of the disregard for the sort of fuck it's everything in that book is just, it's just makes you just.
Yeah, I don't know how you pronounce it. I've only ever read it, but Henry Chinaski, like, is the way what he's character. But he does exactly the same thing. Like, Chinaski is Bukowski, just as Bandini is Fante. You know, they're just writing thinly, very, very, very thinly veiled autobiography.
Mm. And so I want to kind of go into this period where we've talked about you kind of. Yeah, being in the wilderness, which I think everyone goes through in some respects, you get this gift to become a writer. Like, talk me through that 6 months. What does that look like, and what does that feel like in your soul?
Well, so what it was whilst I was at school failing at everything. I was hanging out I was brought up in Tunbridge Wells in Kent, and there was a venue there. It used to be called the Rumble Club. All these bands would come through. I remember Suede came through, and they got paid £80. So it was sort of pre-Britpop, when all these bands were very small, and they would come through. Green Day played there. You know, it's literally like 150 venue. It's incredible, a little place it was. And they had a fanzine which they would use to, you know, like a photocopied DIY magazine, which they would use to promote the gigs. So there would be interviews with the bands and, you know, listings and stuff. And I was into rock music, and they were much cooler than me. These people at the Rumble Club, they were into indie music. They were like 10 years older than me, and I was like literally 14, and, you know, getting drunk on Woodpecker cider at the Rumble Club. And they one of them asked me one time, "Do you want to write a little rock column in it was called Spiel in this magazine?" So I was like, "Yeah, definitely, I'd love to do that." So I started doing that, and then. His name's David Jarvis. He really gave me my first break. He decided he'd had enough of Spiel at some point when I was about 19, and said, "Do you want to take it over?" So I took the whole thing over, and by then the Rumble Club would move to the Forum, which was like a public toilet, which they converted, and it's still there, still going strong, the Forum. And so that's what I would do. I was working in the record shop. It was the grunge era. I had the long hair and everything, and I would interview all the bands. I would hang out with the local bands. It was a big sort of music scene. And then one time there was a magazine called Loaded, like a men's magazine in the 90s, early 2000s, and somebody from Loaded read a couple of record reviews that I'd done and thought they were good. So asked me, "Do you want to write a story for Loaded?" And I was like, "Yeah, I definitely do." So I did. I wrote 2 or 3 stories for them, and then because I had a job, and I think I had like 4 weeks off a year? I got like the minimum, the legal minimum. I got 4 weeks off a year, I think it is. And I'd used up all my holiday period, so I said, "I can't do any more writing for you for a year because or however long it was, 9 months, because I've got no holiday left." And the guy went, "Are you fucking prick?" And he put the phone down. I just thought, "Oh, that's that then." But then they found the job for me. They thought, well, the only way we're going to he's going to write for us is if we find a job for him. So they found they hired me as a sort of full-time staff writer. So it was just this amazing. I mean, it was amazing. It was incredible. It was literally like a gift from the gods. You know, it was just, I couldn't believe, because I always used to read Loaded. I used to love it. I used to think it was hilarious and crazy magazine. And so to be writing for them was just, and as I say, it did. That's why I was always interested in Ramsey and Gill's origin stories, because it felt the same for me. It was in my mid-20s. I'd fucked everything up, and I was given this incredible opportunity to succeed in something. So I just ran at it with everything that I had.
I think Gill was dyslexic, so a lot of what he did was speak into like a. Oh, I can't remember. I mean, I've read every single thing of Gill. I think he's amazing, especially the way he writes about food. It's just like, wow. Yeah. You're reading his prose. You're just like, that. It's just insane. But then, I get it. So you get given this opportunity, but like, how do you actually become? Because I remember, I think it was in Selfie. I was reading this yesterday. It's the one when you tee up the story and you introduce Sigmund Freud. I said like Sig, but the way you tie that in, you're like, oh, and that was Sigmund Freud at the end. I was like reading that. I was thinking, fucking hell, because so much nonfiction is so just kind of pallid and just can be quite bland. But yeah, so what are the reps you did to run at it and actually get really good at storytelling? Like, was it reading? Obviously it was reading and writing, but like, what does it actually look like?
Well, honestly, I have to thank Loaded Magazine for that. Even though today people look back at Loaded Magazine as if it was some terrible porn mag, when I started there, it was actually staffed by people who really cared a lot about their writing. A lot of really good writers, and there's a writer called Michael Holden, who when I started, he said, "You got to read this book," and the book was called The New Journalism, a collection of journalism by Tom Wolfe. And it was compiled, I think, in the late 60s, early 70s. And he said, this is what you're doing as a feature. They call it long form now, but at the time they called it feature writing. It's what feature writers do. And it basically, the new journalism opens with this prologue called Like a Novel. And Tom Wolfe tells a story about the discovery by Esquire magazine, another men's magazine, in the 60s, this idea where you could actually write non-fiction using the skills of the novelist. And this just sort of, I could just blew my mind because I went from, when I was writing my own stuff for my magazine, I never thought about the writing. It was just filling space, just bashed it down. I never considered it to be in anything like an art form. But it reframed it for me, and it said, non-fiction is, it can be every bit as creative and powerful as literature. And the culture, the status game Loaded at the time when I started, it went wrong very rapidly. But when I started, it was still the old culture where you get these incredibly ambitious male writers and this sort of slightly bully boy, super aggressive climate. But the competition was who's the best writer, and people at Loaded would compete over things like who can write the best first sentence, because at Loaded you were judged by your first sentence. If you had a great first sentence, it was like you being judged by knife skills. And the other thing is your structure. Who can get away with the craziest, most batshit insane structure and still get it printed, still get it past the editors? So that was how people competed in those days. And like one of the rules at Loaded, which I've never heard anywhere else about first sentences, was that you're not allowed to start a first sentence with a quote, the word I, the word the, or someone's name. And that was the kind of unwritten rule I was told by the editor. And so it was one of these things like, Jesus, like that really forces you to think. And so and I 25 years later, I still do that. So if you pick up any of my books, I never start with a quote, with a name, with the word I, or with the word the. It always starts somewhere else. And it forces you to, think really creatively about how to open up a story. So all of that you've talked about, honestly, it was drilled into me at Loaded by the writers there at Loaded who took what they did extremely seriously and competed with each other extremely seriously about who could be the best writer.
It's interesting what you said about if I was 18 and worked in a kitchen, I would have become a chef. It's almost a bit later on. You got that high octane environment, but instead of, as you said, chopping an onion, you're chopping your first sentence. And I think it's really interesting. What would you say is your favorite opening line you've ever written, in your opinion?
Oh no, you're asking me to choose between my children.
Let's pick a few, and I'd love to go into how you chop and change them.
My first book, which I started slightly disown these days, was based on a Loaded story. It was So in the first 6 months I Loaded, I wrote a story about a ghost hunter in America. And it won an award. So I wrote a book about ghosts. And the book begins, don't freak out. That's rule number one. So I really like that because it's just sort of, and that's pure, that's 100% in the Loaded style. That's just, following those rules just gets you straight into the story in a way that I just think is really powerful. It really works. So when I'm teaching people non-fiction these days, I also tell them to sort of try and think this way.
And because I think, as I say, I think the storytelling and fiction, not non-fiction, is actually any business leader that can get really powerful at telling stories. It's kind of, I believe, a passport to the top, like an email. A subject email line, if written with a really great hook, is just can really get meetings you shouldn't really be allowed to have. Do you know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
if you're trying to write to your team and convey emotion, being able to do that in like a compelling way is so valuable. And I think Seth Godin says is that, you know, writing is thinking. So the more kind of lucid you can get with your thinking and polish it and cut it, the better you're going to be presenting. What would you say are some? So we talked about the hook in your first book you wrote. What are some of your other kids, your other?
Well, I think my favourite one, my favourite one, and it's definitely the most successful one because it's the one that I saw lots on Twitter. The science of storytelling begins. We know how this ends. You're going to die, and so is everyone you love. so that I think that's the that's probably the beginning I'm proudest of, because it's a bit of a punch around the old chops, that one. So and just seeing how it was responded to on Twitter and stuff. People, that first paragraph of the science of storytelling, people really liked. And again, that was my very early days loaded training that taught me how to do that stuff.
And then what is your kind of creative process or discipline, I should say? I don't know if you've ever read The War of Art, which is by Stephen Pressfield, which is have you ever read that? Like the
No, I think I've got it.
Oh, it's very good. So it's about like just showing up, he says, put your ass where your heart wants to be, which is basically sit at the fucking laptop and write. I think this is such a great way of putting it.
Yeah.
But yeah, what's your daily, is it like early morning, loads of coffee, smash it out? Is it late at night? What are the kind of the idiosyncrasies in your process to create these insane books?
Well, I mean, it's not really about the daily. The daily for me. I mean, it's just. I mean, I have ordinary days where I basically I can write 1,000 words a day. It doesn't matter if I really try and write. I can literally write 2,000 or 3,000 words, but they're terrible. But I can't write any more than 1,000 good words a day. That's no matter what I do. That's the rule. So it tends to be 500 in the morning and 500 in the afternoon, and emails and whatever else in between those things. But for me, the real secret is that I tend to once or twice, maybe 3 times a year, I'll go away for a few weeks to a hotel somewhere with a huge amount of books, and I will just spend that time in a very intense phase of reading, trying to figure stuff out, and doing 3 or 4 hour walks every day, processing what I've been reading and putting things together. So all of my non-fiction books have been really put together conceptually in nice hotels, around the world, mostly in Asia. So I remember, it was most of the Science of Storytelling was put together in a hotel in Ho Chi Minh City. That's when I was figuring it all out. The book that I've just finished, I was in the Oberoi in Mumbai for 3 weeks a couple of years ago, and that's when I was having lots of eureka moments figuring out what this book is. So that's the secret. I like when I do these trips away, it does feel like you've done about sort of 4 months work in 3 weeks. It's so incredibly intense, because one of the things that I do is I don't adjust my internal clock. So I'll wake up at local time, midday or 2 in the afternoon, and then when I'm at home, I have to get up, I have to walk the dog, all that stuff. You literally just open your laptop, open the Kindle app, and you're gone, and you're in. So there's no fucking around. And then 3 or 4 hour walk, you're back, another hour, another walk, and then you work until 2 or 3 in the morning, local time, 4 in the morning, because you've not adjusted. And it's just, so you're kind of doing these effectively sort of 15-hour days, but it doesn't feel like that somehow. And it's just extremely intense, and I come back with what I feel like is this big bag of gold, all these amazing ideas, all these connections that I've made. So that's really the kind of, if I have a secret to what I do, it's these sort of incredibly intense trips that I do away.
Yeah, I love learning author's creative process. I don't know whether it's bullshit or not, but have you ever seen Hunter S. Thompson's like daily routine, which is just when he just has like, it's just fucked up. He has like, it's just like 9 a.m. cocaine, ciggies. Then it's like more, it's like, whether it's probably,
I read that his wife was very skeptical about those stories. I think there's
exactly.
Didn't she say something like, well, the road to Los Angeles didn't write itself. You know, like I think I'm sure that there's a lot of myth making going on with that. Like he's another absolute genius, but yeah, I mean, a lot of hard work went into those incredible books, and I'm not sure I believe that it was fucked up.
They sound it's kind of like a gospel or kind of a living memory of him. But why Asia? Like, what does Asia do for you as a place to go and pull these ideas together? I'm just curious.
Well, I mean, on a very practical level, it's the safest part of the planet. Like I feel when I'm doing some of these walks, I'm on my own late at night, sometimes with a nice camera around my neck, and I feel safe. But I've not gone to the Philippines. The Philippines I wouldn't do on my own because I think that's quite dangerous. But like China, India, Japan, Vietnam, I've always felt mostly completely safe in these countries. So that's one of the main reasons, but also sort of beyond that, there's something about Asia which I just find completely addictive. It's just there's just an energy in the streets. I love the tropical heat of sort of Vietnam, or Bangkok is another favorite of mine. So it's there's just an energy. And just the neon and the kind of buzz in the streets. I just don't. I've never been anywhere else in the world like it, including sort of New York and all those kind of cliche places. It just feels like there's this energy in Asia that I just find really magical. Whether it's Calcutta or Bangkok or even a city like Tokyo.
Yeah. And also, I think some of the Japanese writers. So there's the obvious one is Murakami, but there's the other Murakami whose writing's insane. It's like has these fucked up kind of like horror kind of stories. But yeah, there's something in the Japanese. I always think like the Japanese writing is a bit like that. Well, Murakami's at least is a bit like the sushi in terms of it's just so simplistic. There's no fat on it at all. Everything's cut away. So when you take these walks, like, what's that? Because you said you come back with bags of gold. Like, talk me through how that kind of works for you.
Well, it's really about making connections. Often what I'm doing is I'm reading books of psychology books, because lots of my books are based around psychology. And I suppose the thing about academia, one of the things about academia is it's very siloed. So necessarily they've got a very deep but very narrow expertise. So what you're often doing is you're making connections that maybe other people haven't made. So I mean, the obvious one being with the science of storytelling, where psychologists and neuroscientists are writing about the importance of change to perception, for example, or they're writing about human self-domestication, where humans had to suddenly become extremely interested in human behavior and the behavior of the humans. And of course, an evolutionary psychologist is not going to be thinking about storytelling because that's not their job. That's not what they're thinking about. But I am. So what you're doing is you read these books going, but hang on a minute, if we've evolved to be deeply interested in the internal lives of other people, that's storytelling. Like that's why we've become deeply interested in storytelling, because storytelling is this deep investigation into the internal lives of other people. So that's kind of what you're doing, and that's for my next book, the book that's out in February, which is called A Story is a Deal. There was lots of that, lots of thinking about. There's a concept in evolutionary psychology that they call joint attention, which is this idea that it was a crucial part of our evolution as humans, because other animals can't do that thing where they're both looking at the same thing and problem and trying to solve it in the same way and trying to figure out how together we can solve this thing. So and in order to do that, you have to have the ability of joint attention. And from I'm thinking, well, that's also storytelling. That's what happens when everyone's experiencing a story, is that everybody in the cinema, everybody in the theatre is having this incredible experience of joint attention. Everyone's experiencing the same world, the same goals, the same obstacles, the same characters. So that's kind of what you're doing on the walks, really, is that you're reading all these books, and then on the walks, your brain's kind of sifting through it, and you're thinking, is that? Am I right in thinking that is the same thing? And sometimes you're wrong, So you're just kind of figuring it all out. You're kind of letting 3 or 4 books you've read over the last couple of days kind of blend and kind of talk to each other and connect with each other.
The joint attention thing is fascinating and kind of tees me up where I want to take this next, in terms of the storytelling is kind of the thread that goes through kind of humans in terms of this collectivism, and allows us to do things that, as you say, no other animal can. I think Steve Jobs has got a quote which is like, the greatest, or the storyteller is the most important person in the room, which I love, because, and I think this will help a lot of people who are listening to this, in terms of, you can tell great stories. Like, I really believe sales is essentially stories, and what you said there, the stories a deal, is really clever. But I think, to start with, I'd love to know what the relationship between sort of status storytelling and selfie is, like how they interweave. First, and then second, like, how can a brand infiltrate that space? Do you see what I mean? So, for example, I was writing about this the other day. There's kind of Just Do It by Nike is kind of a story they're using, and if I do a gym session, my Lonsdale fucking trackies, then it's not going to be as good as if I get my new Nike Just Do It ones on, because that's told me a bit of a story, is where I'm trying to, I don't know if that helps set the premise of this. So yeah, I'd love to know kind of what the difference how the status storytelling and selfie are linked, and then how brands can begin to kind of infiltrate that world.
Yeah. Okay. So it really sort of goes back to what we were saying before about the story world that humans live in. We live in these two realities at once. We live in the physical reality, with the same as all the other plants and animals, where we're interested in survival, oxygen, food, shelter, that kind of stuff. But we spend most of our time in the story world, and the story world is the place of identity. It's the place where we have, feuds and goals and adventures. And we exist in the physical world as this bag of bones and blood and meat, but we exist in the story world as this identity. We're a character, it's a semi-fictional character. But that character, that identity, is extremely important to us. And evolutionarily speaking, it was important to us because, you can think of it as our reputation. If we had a good reputation in the tribe, in the stories the tribe would tell of each other, then everything would get better. But if we had a bad reputation, we could be ostracized from the tribe, kicked out of the tribe, and we could be killed and eaten. So we've evolved to be extremely concerned about our identity, about our character in the story world. And so we measure how well our character, our identity, is doing in two different ways. The first way is by how connected we are to other people. So as a tribal animal, we're programmed to want to feel we have belonging. And that we are connected into groups of people that understand the world in the same way as we do. So people like us, we gather into we flock into these kind of tribes of people like us, and we have to feel connected to the human world in that way. And the second way is status. We have to feel like those people like us that we connected to, that we're not just connected to them, but they value us. They think that we are worth something, that we have their respect. So we want to be connected and respected as those two kinds of ways. And those are the two things that brands offer. They offer connection and they offer status. They offer connection by saying, if you want to be by telling a story of, these are our brand values. This is the world as we understand it. This is what we want in the world. And if you agree with the story that they're telling, then you feel this urge to connect with them. So if you identify with the story, the vision of the world that Nike projects, then you're going to seek to connect with it. And the same with status. We use things which offer us status in the story world, that signal that we are somewhat successful. So those are the two ways that brands can use these ideas, is that understanding that they're offering connection and status. They're kind of telling a tribal story. I mean, one example, obviously it was with CrossFit. Like CrossFit, everybody wears Metcon shoes, Nike Metcons. And so now I wear Nike Metcon shoes, because everybody does. And then when you see everybody's got the Metcon shoes, and you feel part of their gang. And so I'm sure that is a good shoe. I don't no idea, but I know that I feel connected into that group because everybody wears Metcons, and Nike done a great job of. I don't know if it's just our CrossFit box or whether it's all of them. I suspect it's all of them, but they've done a great job in creating this shoe that says if you're in the know. You know that somebody wearing Metcons is probably a CrossFitter, and so that's a way that they're offering connection into that tribe.
It's so interesting because obviously the week we're recording this, it was a marathon on Sunday, and I was there watching my mate run, and I was like, right, fuck it, I'm a runner now, right? And this is me becoming the hero of my in terms of this. I was looking for the storytelling of the race on Sunday, the buzz ricocheting through London. I was like, well, I want some status and I want connection to this group. This is literally what was happening the last 24 hours. So I was like, screw it. I'm going to go to this Runner's Need, which is this shop where they put you on the treadmill to kind of test what your legs are like when you run. I don't know if it's a load of bollocks, but it's great salesmanship. And I really wanted a pair of those On running shoes. I don't know if you've seen they're like ON.
No, I don't know those.
But yeah, they're kind of like they're a bit like another version of a Metcon. But in my head, I really wanted those ones. Anyway, so the bloke comes outside and it's like, mate, I've got you some Brooks ones and some Asics ones, and I'm like, yeah, cool, mate. I know they might be better for my foot, but I want the On ones. Yeah. And even though I put the On ones on, and they were just markedly less comfortable, but I think it kind of. To what you've just said there is we want status and we want connection, and then the storytelling is almost the thing is the beacon that says, as Seth Godin says, tribes, like we're trying to pull a tribe together.
Story is a deal, the deal of every archetypal story makes a deal with people, and the deal is always about connection and status. So if you think about a fairy tale. Or the kind of tales that children are told, they're always got a lesson in them, and that lesson is this is how you should behave. If you behave like a hero, people are going to love you and admire you, and that's connection and status. But if you behave like a villain, like a bad person, you're going to be rejected and disrespected, and you're going to be low status. So archetypal storytelling always has that deal. Subconsciously plugged into it. It's always offering. It's always telling you. It's always offering you a deal. Do as the hero does. Do as the story is telling you to do, and you can get connection and status. And brand stories are exactly the same, but it's buy our product, and you get connection into this group. You get status in this group. You can think about coffee brands in the same way. McDonald's coffee, Starbucks coffee, Monmouth Coffee Company. The coffee isn't that different, if we're honest. It's kind of very similar, a latte and one or the other. Maybe it's a bit stronger. But what those brands are offering are different stories. What story do you want to tell about yourself? Well, I mean, for lots of people, they don't want a McDonald's coffee. They want the Monmouth coffee, because when they drink a McDonald's coffee, it makes a bad deal with them. It makes them feel low status. It connects me into this fast food shitty world that I don't want to be identified with. I want to be identified with Monmouth Coffee, which is all about single origin and looking after the farmers. So even those coffee shops, if you can call it, the McCafe versus the Starbucks versus the Monmouth, you walk into those shops, you're walking into a different story world. You're walking into a different, and they are selling coffee, but what they're really selling is a story, and it's a story about you. It's a story about. It's not really about a story about their coffee. It's a story about you. And when I drink Monmouth, I feel like a different person to when I drink Starbucks. I don't feel like a different person to when I drink a McCafe, for $1.49. Even though they're not radically different drinks beyond strength.
Oh my God, I am so excited. It feels like Hungary is finally swimming in the big leagues. I can't believe this. It's absolutely mental. But delighted to announce that Big Fish, yes, Big Fish, are partnering with the podcast. Perry's been on the podcast 3 times. Listeners absolutely love it. Some of my most downloaded and cherished episodes of all time. But Big Fish are behind literally so many brands in your cupboard, in your weekly shop. Charlie Bigham, Year Valley, Tyrrell's, Clipper Tea, Goo, Rana. I mean, mate, the list is longer than the River Nile. But they also share risk and invest in brands that they really believe are a force for good. They're brands that they believe are going to be the next big thing, like Howder, the snack that gives back. But even more exciting news, Big Fish want to speak to the next wave of small challenger food and drink brands that are destined for big things. The raconteurs, the movers, shakers, buccaneering visionaries. So look, if you want to speak to Big Fish and just have a chat, get your brand in front of them, then drop me a message. My mate Louis from Local Beer, Amazing Beer, was in their office, aka La Fish Bowl, last week chatting to Perry and the Big Fish crew. So drop me a message if you would like to speak to them. Bohemi, our beloved sponsor, are helping build the fastest growing challenger food and drink brands. Look, if you're a small brand just starting out and you need your first indie stockist, your first 100 stockists to wholesale, Bohemi are the platform to categorically speed that up. But if you're a big brand wanting to get bigger, Bohemi are also insane. They make field sales marble smooth, silky slick. They're just epic. Ollie's been on this podcast twice actually. They saw a 29% uplift in sales when using Bohemi to check major malt listings availability. Insane. 29% uplift by downloading an app. Insane. Lucky Saint, my boy Aaron Duff, who's coming on this podcast in a couple of weeks, he uses it to manage a team of 30 people, and they've, Lucky Saint, have unlocked 500 draft listings by using Bohemi. Look, you've got to get involved with this stuff. It's absolutely insane, and it will categorically change your life. It's just the sickest platform. I use it all the time at Islands. What we were talking about then before this is like how brands infiltrate the kind of the storytelling status, and you've said kind of status and connection storytelling. Half the reason, Oatly, like the oat milk. So oat milk was a category that was like a shit house at the bottom of the crusty kind of old health stores in kind of in the like Forest Row kind of places. No one was really drinking it. What Oatly did so shrewdly is they infiltrated all these hipster baristas where there's a lot of connection, a lot of status. They got into all the best London coffee shops. And because they were in there, they got status, connection. They could build this tribe around there. And then once they had this kind of bubbling furnace of kind of diehard zealots of the brand, the story spread, which is wild. Say you're a brand owner and you are trying to, you've got, say, a delicious product, whatever. It could be running shoes, it could be jam, it could be chili oil, it could be whatever. And you're trying to create a better story around your brand to attract more of a diehard tribe who gain status and connection from that story. Because to preface this is, I see a lot of brands who don't have the best story in the world, which means they're just quite vanilla. They're a bit meh. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. How would you go about doing that? Say you're a founder, and I know it's quite a big. There's a lot to go through there.
Well, I think if there's one thing, it's specificity. I think bad brand storytelling is usually very vague, and it's trying to appeal to everybody at once. And if you're trying to appeal to everybody, you appeal to nobody. I think it's a case of identifying the people, the group, the group of the tribe or the group of people like us that you want to appeal to, and you really need to sort of jump into their story world and find out about their values, find out what stories they tell each other, find out about their heroes and their villains, and then it's just a case of reflecting that story world back at them in a way that they recognise, that they identify with. That moment that they see that brand and then go, yeah, that's me. Is the moment that you've kind of got them, and that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to just reflect. We all carry around in our brains this everything we'll ever know about everything, the entire world that we exist in, the story world that we exist in, and it's what of heroes and villains, and we're at the center of it. And it's got symbols and everything that you need to live. Everything we'll ever know exists in our brain, but everyone's got a slightly different story world to each other, and we're constantly looking for people to connect with that are similar to us, that respond to the world, that experience the external world in a similar way. And those are our friends. Those are the people that we fall in love with. And when psychologists look at people who are deeply in love, they find that one of the tells is that they finish each other's sentences all the time. I mean, my wife and I have this. We have the same thought at the same time. I always say to her, I was about to say that. So we're so in sync. Our story worlds are so fused that we are, in that story space, in the non-physical space, kind of almost not the same person, but we've fused, we've blended. And that's what long-term love is. That's what love is. That's what friendship is. That's what companionship is. It's people who have these similar story worlds that kind of mesh together. And as a brand, you're trying to tap into that. You're trying to understand, in a profound sense, how does this group of people see the world? What's important to them? How do they, language is really important. How do they talk? What language do they use? What symbols are important to them? Who are their heroes? Who are their villains? And it's just a case of reflecting just even a small part of that back at them. You'll get them, because people will look at that and go, yeah, that's me. And we're always looking to connect with stuff that feels like me, because it's incredibly reassuring. It's incredibly validating and empowering to feel like there's other people and other things out there in the world that understand the world in the same way that you do.
I'm just thinking of brands that have kind of mimicked that reflection. I suppose the obvious one is that example of me going to the running shop saying, I need fucking ons, mate, even if I don't have them. but I do think, in kind of the young professionals in London, Vijas, which are those sort of vegan, the shoes with the V, that loads of a certain type of person has moved and gravitated towards that. And I suppose that's a great example of a brand putting their beacon down, saying, this is our story. This is how you're going to get status and connection. And then obviously the tribe coming, and then I suppose the tribe tells the story for you. This is what kind of Seth Godin said to me: is if the tribe get affiliation, i.e. connection and status, and actually said the third thing for spreading stories was actually fear, as a thing. But if you get those three things, the story will spread. You talked about the different archetypes of stories, and I know you've talked somewhere about is it the light?
The light figure.
The light figure, yes. Define what the light figure is, please, Will. And then who was the light figure in your life to get you to here?
Well, so in story theory, the light figure was a concept that a guy called Christopher Booker came up with in a very brilliant book called The 7 Basic Plots. Kind of a masterpiece, really, I think. And so the light figure, the classic example he gives is in Dickens' A Christmas Carol, the Scrooge story. That Scrooge is the hero of that story. Obviously, he's a miser, he's selfish, and he learns to be generous and giving and loving. And of course, the deal that the classic archetypal story makes is that if you are selfish and giving and loving, you will be connected and you will raise in status. So it's a classic archetypal story. But the light figure in that story are the 3 ghosts. So the light figures are ones that come in and help the hero get what they want. They show the hero how to get their connection and status. So the ghost said, look, this is your Christmas past, this is your Christmas present. And if you carry on being like a dick, this is your Christmas future. So those were the light figures. And so the concept of the light figure, I think, is incredibly important in persuasive storytelling, in business storytelling, because the organization, the company that is advertising, they're the light figure in the story. So the hero of the story is the customer. You are there as a light figure to help the customer get what they want. So the Metcons shoe will help the customer become the best CrossFitter in the box. And of course, so raise in status, and also by wearing the Metcons, you're going to be connected into that tribe, that status game of CrossFitters. So that's why the light figure is an incredibly important concept in business storytelling, because that's the role the business plays in a persuasive story. And that's true whether you're a tech company or you're a political party. The persuader is always there to help the hero get what they want, and what the hero wants is either survival, if you're selling medicine or something, but very often it's connection and status. But it's always one of those 3 things: survival, connection, or status.
Just trying to think of had a call. He's coming on the podcast actually with the Innocent founder this morning, and I think they were one of the first brands who did this deliciously in terms of being the light figure. In terms of before Innocent, there was just kind of Tropicana or basically kids were drinking fizzy pop. They came in and were like, they told the story through the playful tone of voice. The Innocent is kind of the angelic light figure, literally like we're the Innocent, you've got the face of it. And they kind of show to the consumer is there is another way. You can be the hero of eating healthier or drinking healthier if you buy our juice. And then this links to kind of the storytelling, the status. Oh, I'm drinking Innocent. It's more expensive, but you know, and then the connection of it. I think it's truly fascinating. The what I want to talk about is you said, to the kind of the brands being the light figure in business storytelling. What else? Let's go down that road a little bit more. Well, what else is there in terms of business storytelling and?
Well, I mean, so you know, business storytelling, persuasive storytelling, as I've been talking about, is very much about doing a deal with people, survival, connection, or status. The other thing that I've written about in my upcoming book is I call it story being. It's slightly, odd word, but you know, these storytelling principles, this idea that a story is a deal, also really matters for the cultures of companies. So in a healthy corporate culture, that was also doing a deal with people, and it's not a deal for money. You know, perhaps surprisingly, when survey after survey after survey all over the world finds a very weak relationship between job satisfaction and pay. What people want from their work is what they always want, which is connection and status. So what motivates people, what gives people a sense of meaning and purpose, and satisfaction and joy in their work, is feeling securely and safely connected into a group whose mission you care about, and that your individual contributions, that your status, your value within the organization is seen and valued. And so I think that so I call that idea of story being. It's not just about telling stories. It's also about creating a healthy story in a company to really unlock people's motivation and to really give them the very profound gifts of meaning and purpose, which you can have in any job, regardless of how much pay you're taking home at the end of every week.
Story being amazing. How does someone do that? Let's say they're a brand owner, they've got an office in Shoreditch, which they're probably paying too much money for, probably slurping up a lot of flat whites and probably wearing, Metcons at lunch break. But how does one create a culture with story being in it to make their employees feel status and connection?
Well, I think the key. Well, so for the connection thing, it's not only up to the employer. I think it's important that the hire for identification, by which I mean skills can be taught, but if the person can be incredibly skilled on paper and perfect for your position, but if they're not enthusiastic about your mission in the world, if they're not enthusiastic about what your organization is doing, then they're not going to be the right person for that job, because they're never going to feel connected into your the super organism of your company. So it's important that the people that are at your work, want to be there and feel like that the mission that the company is doing is a mission that they can identify with and feel that they want to cooperate with. And then beyond that, the status part is really allowing everyone's individual contribution to be recognized and seen and celebrated. There was one sort of really impressive study that was done by a guy called Dan Cable, a British academic, in a call center in India, a company called Wipro, and Wipro provide customer services to tech companies. So when you phone up a customer service and you get put through to India and you go, oh, that's probably Wipro. It could be Wipro because one of those companies. And one of the problems of having call centers is that high staff turnover, because obviously working in call centers is really stressful. It's not very nice. And so Dan's team were asked by Wipro, can you figure out a way of reducing staff turnover? So he hit connection and status. especially status. And how they did that was they just sort of tweaked the induction process. So when new employees were inducted into WePro in this experiment, they were given 15 minutes. So they were sent away on their own for 15 minutes to work on this series of problem-solving tasks. Then they were told to spend 15 minutes reflecting on the decisions that they'd made in these problem-solving tasks, and then trying to think, how can I use these skills that I've got and the skills that I've shown with these problem-solving tasks to be a really great member of staff at WePro? And then, importantly, they were given 15 minutes to talk to the group about who they were, about their backgrounds, and about the decisions they'd made and how they felt they could be a really great WePro staff member. And then just to add a bit of extra connection, a little kiss of connection, they were given a badge and a sweatshirt with WePro stitched into it and their name. So they felt like they've been sort of, they were belonging now to this group. And over the next 6 months, extraordinarily, that group who had the different induction process, there was a 33% reduction in staff turnover in that group. So simply doing that 45-minute exercise completely rewired how a lot of them saw their job at the call center. So it's a massive result. Not only that, they also their customer service feedback was better than the other group. So when people were giving their marks out of 5, whatever it was, at the end of the call, these people who had been through this induction process were doing a better job. They were clearly more motivated, more enthusiastic to help people. And that's all about status. That's all about allowing that person's individual contributions to the group to be seen. There's a phrase that's endemic in business, which I think is kind of cancerous. And that phrase is, nobody is indispensable. No, nobody's indispensable. And of course, that's technically true. Anybody can be fired and replaced. But I think psychologically it's an existentially mortifying idea, because we all want to feel indispensable. And I would argue we have evolved to feel indispensable. In the hunter-gatherer groups in which we evolved, which all modern organizations are based on psychologically, they're all just highly cooperative groups, they'd have numbered between 30 and 50 people. So that 30 and 50 people that you spend most of your everyday with would be responsible for keeping the entire group going. So a huge division of labor. Some are out trying to find honey, some are trying to find sweet potatoes, some are hunting, some are looking after the sorcery, the storytelling, the camp, whatever. So everybody had their part to play. And so, it seems clear to me that for most of the time we've been on Earth, feeling indispensable would have been an ordinary experience in life, and feeling indispensable to the tribe, that my efforts today have been absolutely invaluable to the group. That would have been a relatively normal thing. So I think giving people just a bit of that in their corporate culture is enormously valuable, allowing people to feel that your individual contribution, your individual skill set is really important to the mission of the group.
It's the merging of the two stories, which I think with that call center example is it's like, well, this is is it
WePro.
WePro, sorry, mate.
Yeah.
In India, these are our values. This is how we want to work. This is how you're going to gain connection and status through this story. Put your marker down. But then there's obviously this disparity between people leaving the business because they're not feeling seen. And I think this story to deal is just a beautiful phrase, and this story being, and that small tweak of just allowing them to tell their story to make them feel seen with the name tag. Suddenly you're going from the two story worlds are connecting and kind of linking on together. What's crazy is it's the small things.
Yeah, Dan Kaler's got this beautiful phrase. He says, "People want to see the me in we," which I love. That I wish I'd come up with that. The me in we. So when you're working for an organisation, we want to feel the me in we. So the we is really important. WePro, like every organisation, is its own story world with its own mission, its own heroes, its own villains, its own rules. And as an employee, you're going into that story world. You're being asked to become part of that story world. And if you're securely connected, properly connected into that story world, you're going to be enthusiastic. But connection isn't enough. You also need that status. You also need, I'm in this story world. I'm part of this world, but I'm important to it. I'm heroic in it, just as you are and you are. So I see the perfect organizations like being like a band of superheroes where everybody's, together fighting the villains, doing their heroic mission in the world. But each individual superhero's got their own strengths and their own little thing that they do, which brings value to the group. So that's like the kind of perfect model of the group, I think, is that kind of superhero model, the band of superheroes.
the me and we is so I think relating this to food is Julia Metcalf who did Pret a Manger and Itsu. So Itsu's story or their beacon is eat beautiful.
Yes.
Like, two words, super clever.
Yeah.
The kind of the symbolism of that is the butterfly moving. I don't know why I'm doing that with my hands, but the butterfly. But then when you go into their office and they've got one of Steve Jobs' like original kind of Mac prototypes. I don't know how he got it, but he's got it, and it's in like a box. So as every employee is going to the lift to get into work, it's like almost like a signal of that storytelling of like when you come here, you get status and signal of like this is eat beautiful. We're going to eat beautiful. But then what's wild about Julian Metcalf, what he did at Pret, is so that the CEO now, a guy called Pano, started off as I think he might have worked at like Heathrow at one of the Pret kiosks, but through constant celebration of status and connection is over 23 years, he's now risen to the top. And obviously Julian's now stepped back. Same thing happened with, she's now the MD of Gales, a girl called Marta. Maybe she was the one who was at Heathrow. But it is this celebration of storytelling and storytelling and this celebration of status and connection. I think there's just so much in that for people listening to this. I want to talk about, this is quite random. This is just, I saw this book on your Instagram called Humanize and the Blandemic. So this is something that I was in Canary Wharf the other week, on Sunday, actually, after the marathon. And something that's always fascinated me is how come the buildings have got so shit? Like, how can you go to a place like Rome or even like parts of London where it's all this beautiful Baroque kind of just gorgeously just pleasing architecture, and then you see Canary Wharf and you're just like it's like this odious kind of growth on the end of London. It's disgusting. The architecture, at least. Talk to me about what you learned about working on that book.
Yeah, so I was very lucky. I was very lucky to work with Thomas Heatherwick, who's just a genius and one of the premier British architects on that book. It's his book that I kind of helped with and collaborated with on the on some of the research and some of the writing. So I had a great sort of 4 years going around the world with him as he gave me an education in architecture. And part of what I wanted to do was to figure out how it had all happened. That's partly by listening to Thomas, but also doing some of my own research. And it's a really amazing story because what everybody kind of assumes is that England got bombed to crap up in the Second World War and they had to rebuild on the cheap, and that's why buildings look like they do. And there's some truth to that, but actually the real truth is far more weird, and that's that architects like those buildings. So all those glass flat boxes that are just made out of squares and are incredibly boring and oppressive and repetitive, they win awards all the time, and so it was really 100 years ago and more in the 1920s. This new kind of fad, this phase, which was called modernism. Came up, and there's modernist literature, modernist art. Some of it's very famous. James Joyce. The urinal. Modern art, conceptual art that people still chunder about.
Wait, James Joyce, as in the writer James Joyce, or
Ulysses, books like Ulysses, which are very difficult to read. Yeah. So the idea was, look, life is, we're in this new scientific age. Life is confusing and chaotic, and art should reflect reality, which is confusing and chaotic. And so our art in general went from the heart to the head. We stopped caring so much about emotions and beauty, and we started caring much more about ideas. So that's
what year is this? Sorry, mate. So just
this is in the 1920s, beginning in the 1920s. So that's modernism, and that's fine if you want to put yourself through the torture trying to read a book like Ulysses, which doesn't.
I tried to read it.
Nobody gets past page 4. He's gobbledygook, and the conceptual art, it's fun to go and see and go, well, how is this urinal art? Like a fine. Challenge me with your ideas. But modernism also infected architecture. And the idea of beauty buildings, the idea of beautiful buildings became incredibly unfashionable. And actually, buildings weren't there to make us feel good. Buildings were there for a function, and the function was the important thing. And if you made a building look like what its purpose was, that was actually what that was actually how things should look. So form follows function, and so that idea became very popular in architecture. Most famously with Le Corbusier, who was a thinker as well as an architect, and built lots of very boring concrete boxes that became very influential. And amazingly, modernism has never left architecture. The world of modern architecture is infested with just sort of revisions of modernism. They find the idea of kind of buildings that are kind of curvy or are trying to be beautiful. They find that kind of really reprehensible. And so when you see new buildings being put up that are just these ugly blocks, and when people are saying, as they do in my local newspaper, whenever there's a new block put up, all the comments, why does everything have to look like East Berlin? Why does everything have to look like the Soviet Union? The reason is because that's what architects like, and they think if you like buildings that don't look like that, you're kind of some Tory Philistine. So it's quite extraordinary, and what was even more extraordinary was I wrote the book, and Thomas is great because he just hasn't drunk that Kool-Aid at all. Thomas builds buildings which are, some people love them, some people hate them, but they ain't boring. They're not black, they're not rectangles made of glass and mirrors. They're curvy and do interesting things. And he is despised in the architecture world, and he really is. I was absolutely shocked when we published that book. The attacks that he got, like the architecture critics in The Guardian, I think wrote 3 separate stories about how terrible he was and how terrible this book was. One of them even said his ideas were dangerous. I mean, literally, what Thomas is arguing for is buildings that people like. Can we not build buildings that people like? That's all he's asking for. Buildings that humans like. Pretty buildings, attractive buildings. I don't care how you do it. Just make some buildings people like. And so he's been absolutely. He was savaged for that book. I felt quite bad for him because I'd worked so hard on it with him. But I guess if revenge is the best success, he's a great example of that. He continues to get enormous jobs all around the world. He's currently rebuilding Changi Airport in Singapore. He built Google's Googleplex in Silicon Valley. He's currently working on their headquarters in King's Cross in London. So he continues to get these enormous gigs, but the actual culture, the status game of architects, especially in this country, I'm not exaggerating when I say they despise him. They absolutely hate him.
It's a great little. I didn't think I'd find this link. I wasn't planning to, but it's almost like the in so many brands are kind of. You call it the Blandemic in architecture, but there's like bland brands on shelf, and it's because in supermarket shelves, so that is at least, it's because they're afraid to sometimes stand for something, and sometimes you need to put, as we were talking about earlier, of like be specific with your story. Say this is what we stand for, this is what we don't stand for, and be okay for people to kind of lambast you. But that's cool. Love and hate are the same thing in branding. I think that's right. Fascinating.
Yeah. So Thomas came up with that phrase. I should say Blandemic. That was Thomas's great phrase, Blandemic, and he's absolutely right. And I think a lot of it is, as you say, I think it's down to cowardliness. And one of the things that Thomas argues in the book, and again, this is Thomas's argument, which I completely endorse, is that he's not interested in whether you or he even likes a building aesthetically or not. What's important is that it's interesting. So I hate the Pompidou Centre in Paris. Thomas loves the Pompidou Centre in Paris. But for him, it doesn't matter whether I hate it or not. The point is it's interesting. It's not bland. It's trying to do something really interesting, and that's what we want. But what he's railing against, I think quite correctly, are these anonymous boxes that are popping up all over the world, which means that whenever you can be in any city or anywhere part of the globe, you have no idea where you are because all the buildings look exactly the same, and what they look like are just great, anonymous, usually shiny, decoration-free boxes. That's what he's railing against. It's the blandness.
Are you looking to turbocharge your brand, take it to another level, save money, save energy, save stress, save time, well, I've got the perfect thing for you. I am delighted to announce that HC Brands, formerly HC Consulting, my boy Harry Clark, has just launched a commercial growth accelerator program designed specifically for challenger food and drink brands. You can upskill your commercial team. They've got so many modules. You can handpick them where you can do the full shebang. You're going to save hours of research. You're going to get the tools to turbocharge your growth, get better clarity on your brand's objectives and directions. And look, Harry's worked with some amazing brands, Holy Moly, Islands, Savile, and Rooted Drinks. He's really helped me with a strategy for Hungary. Yeah, if you're looking to turbocharge your brand, link in the show notes, and you're going to be able to do that easy peasy, lemon squeezy. What are some of the buildings, what are some of the buildings he's designed? You briefly touched on a couple there, but like, what are his, the famous ones he's done?
Well, he has designed a building in New York called Vessel, which is very famous. And again, the architects hate it, but the public love it. It's just a kind of piece of public architecture that people walk up. He has built... he was going to build the Garden Bridge, very controversial Garden Bridge, but that didn't hapen due to lots of sort of political shenanigans. He's just finishing. He's designed I think it's the lower floor of the Google building in King's Cross, and he's worked very hard because it's a huge building. It's not on a human scale, so he's worked very hard. In like one of the things that Thomas talks about is the first 80 foot of a building. So lots of these modern buildings that win awards, they look great from a distance. They look great on Instagram. They look great in the architectural designs. But when you're actually walking, they're big, huge blocks. But when you're walking around them as a human being, all you've got are air vents and enormous glass walls. They're horrible. They're inhuman. And so he's very big on the first 80 foot. The first 80 foot of any building's got to be really human. And with the building, with the Google headquarters in King's Cross, he actually got planning permission to do his bottom floor, but then voluntarily went back and went, no, actually, hold that thought. We're going to make it better. It's still not good enough. And they've not unveiled it yet, so I'm not quite sure what it looks like, but they're going to huge lengths to make it feel human. I think probably one of the most popular things he's done is, do you know Coal Drops Yard in King's Cross?
Yeah.
He did Coal Drops Yard. So when he was given that gig, it was just two great Victorian coal warehouses, and they transformed it into that kind of high end shopping zone where the two they built a story above the two warehouses that meet and almost kiss in the middle of the air. Like, it's a wonderful, amazing space. He also, he's a designer of just in general, not just of buildings. And he did the climax of the Olympics opening ceremony with all those flames that came together. He worked with Danny Ball on that. He also designed the London buses, the new London Routemaster buses. That's the Thomas Heatherwick design. So he's not a household name for some reason, but he's hugely present, especially in London, but all around the world as well.
It's quite mad. I used to work for a peanut butter business, and we used to do fucking random, mate. But so we used to go to Google because the Google employees would get free food. So I'd go to the exact office in King's Cross, and you're right, like it's like almost this vaunting gap to get. It's just this glass kind of abyss till you get up to Google. And what you've said there about the first 80 foot has to feel human, that first induction, it kind of links to the call center in Dubai, is that first moment has to feel human.
Yeah.
I think there's something in that. What did not hanging out, sorry, that's a bit rude way of saying it, but like working with a architecture of his pedigree, Tom's pedigree, teach you about the architecture of great storytelling?
I'm not sure. It taught me anything about storytelling. I mean, because I was there to teach him about storytelling. So but like it was a huge honor because we did hang out. I think one of the first things we did was we walked the long way around to Coal Drops Yard, and it was one of those sort of incredible moments when I suddenly realised what this, the story that we were going to tell was that we were walking past literally just a glass rectangle. Awful building that had gone up recently. And he went, that's won an award. And I was like, you've got to be joking me. He said, no, that's won an award. I was like, are you joking? That's won an award. He said, yeah, the architects love this building. It's famous in architecture, this building. They love it. And I was like, why? He said, well, because the glass is slightly white. I was just like, I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. So you really are in a through the looking glass world. And I think it really, I was working with him at the same time as I was working on the status game. And the status game is, one of the big arguments in the status game is that when humans become irrational, it's almost always over the beliefs onto which they've kind of planted their status. So you can think about a cult is the most extreme example of a status game. Like a cult will tell you, if you join my game and you follow these rules exactly, we're gonna promise you this. We're gonna tell this. We're gonna do a deal, and the deal is connection into the cult, but also maximal status. So one thing that cults do, as well, and also religions do, is they promise ridiculous levels of status. So the Heaven's Gate cult, you're going to come down in a UFO, and they're going to take you to the level above human. Scientology offers you're going to become superhuman. You're going to get taken to this other planet. It's ridiculously overblown promises of status. Religion does the same thing. You're going to be reincarnated as a prince. You're going to go to heaven, which is paradise, or you're going to get your 72 virgins. And these are all stories which are offering deals for status. But the other games that we play in life do the same thing and lead us to believing all kinds of crazy shit. That's how things like, that's how these kind of mad beliefs like anti-vax or conspiracy theories happen. People plug their identity and their sense of self, their sense of status into these crazy beliefs. And modern architecture is no different. One psychologist did this extremely telling set of studies because he wanted to figure out how is it because it's not as though like these architects go through their architectural training and all end up with these unique, amazing, different visions about what a good building is. Like if that was happening, that would be great. But that's not what's happening. They all end up liking the same buildings. How is it that all these students go into the university system, go through all their architectural training, and all end up liking blank anonymous boxes and thinking they're beautiful? That's fucking mad. So what he did was he got first year architecture students and wanted to get a baseline measure of their aesthetic sense. So they gave them a lot of pictures and said who's beautiful and who's not beautiful. And then they rated who was beautiful and who was not beautiful. And they compared the architecture students with normal people, like non-architecture students. And they found that it was exactly the same, pretty much. Everybody finds the same humans beautiful. So their aesthetic sense was the same. And also they asked also about buildings. What buildings do you find beautiful and what buildings do you not find beautiful? And there was also, sort of significant coherence, not as much coherence, but significant coherence in the early architecture students and the normal people. And then they carried on testing them as they went through the university system. And they found that the further they got trained and inducted into this story world of the architects, the more their taste diverged away from the general public, and the more they stopped liking curves and detail and ornamentation and cultural notes and started liking anonymous blank boxes. So it is almost like a brainwashing process where what you're taught again, it's this deal. What you're taught subconsciously is, if you decide that you like these anonymous blank boxes, like the Seagrams building and the buildings that you're talking about in Canary Wharf, you will earn status from your peers. You'll become, you will be rewarded with status. But if you decide you like those other buildings, which the general public like, that's low status. And that's an offer that most humans find almost impossible to resist. So that's how I think. That's one of the ways that working with Thomas and hanging out with Thomas informed my thinking about the status game, is that you saw this absolutely brilliant example of the stuff I was writing about the status game happening in this completely other area, which is modern architecture. And as we're on the subject, I have to say that I also see it in the world of restaurants all the time. Like, I really believe this is going on in the world. This is going to be controversial, and lots of your listeners are going to hate me now. But, since my Killian Loan and my Guillaume Brahimi, the one thing I spend my money on is eating at nice restaurants. Is that I don't buy expensive clothes or cars or cameras. I buy expensive meals. So I'm that weirdo you see sitting on his own with his book in the Michelin star restaurant. And it staggers me how many 3-star restaurants I've been in where the food has been entirely forgettable. Because I feel like the chefs, The 3-star chefs are just they're not trying to impress the diner. They're trying to impress the other 3-star chefs. And they're trying to impress the Michelin critics. And they're trying to impress the restaurant reviewers. And they don't actually give a fuck about a lot of them, not all of them, don't really care. They've stopped caring about the ordinary diner. And so my wife and I have been in lots of 3-star places where the food has just been repetitive. It's like the knife skills are incredible, the provenance is incredible, the ingredients is incredible, it's original, but it just doesn't taste of anything. Or if it does taste of something, it just tastes of vinegar. Like vinegar, for some reason, is very fashionable at the moment in these restaurants. And I think the apotheosis for us is my wife. I was very lucky. My wife took me to eat at Noma for my birthday last year. And I'm not exaggerating. It was one of the worst meals I've ever eaten. It was an absolute fuck you. It was unbelievable. It was February in Copenhagen. It was freezing cold. And we were sat down for our £800 per head meal and given dish after dish after dish that was cold or tepid. And it all tasted it was vinegary. Every single flavor palette was vinegar, 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 vinegar. Because it was the lunch service, for some reason, the rules, we had to buy the drinks flight too. Because I don't drink alcohol, it was a wine flight. And it was either tea or kombucha, mostly kombucha, which is more vinegary note, sour, sour, sour. It was horrific. Like, it was unbelievable. At one point, I stood up and to go to the toilet because I needed a wee. And I was told by the waiting staff, you've got to sit down. You can't go to the toilet now because your next course is about to be served. And it's very important that it's served at the right temperature. So I thought, well, at least this is going to be a warm dish. Finally, we're going to get something warm on this freezing cold February afternoon in Copenhagen. No, it was a reindeer penis. It was kind of like it was like raw. I don't mind eating reindeer penis. It's not shocking to me at all. Like, my favorite food is sweetbreads. I don't mind organs. I love foie gras. I love sweetbreads. They're my favorite things. But it was cold. It was slimy, and it was a mixture of raw reindeer penis and it's like, I think it was sunflower seeds in this kind of more vinegar. It was unbelievable. And it really did feel like Rene Redzepi was basically giving us the finger. It was infuriating. It was unbelievable. And it's the classic cliche, but it actually happened. We were walking back to our hotel and my wife had to stop for a crepe from a stand on the way back with the drinks, over £1,000 meal because she was not full. It was unbelievable. And just to finish this rant, sorry, Dan, but I've got to finish this rant. What really gets me is that one of the best meals, well, I'll tell you the 2 best meals I've ever had. First best meal I've ever had is at Bernard Loiseau's old place in France. Now, as you probably know, Bernard Loiseau committed suicide because he thought he was going to lose one of his Michelin stars. And the restaurant is still there, and it's still, I think it's got 2 stars now, and it's run by his daughter. And in honor of Bernard, they still serve you on request, I think, the 3-star meal from the 1990s when he committed suicide. Fucking hell. It was I've never eaten food like it. Oh my God. I can still tell you, I can still remember the whole meal. It was basically 4 courses. The first course is frog's legs with garlic puree. The second course is it's a white fish. I think it's sturgeon with a red wine reduction and shallots. The third course, which I will never forget, so the best thing I've ever eaten, which was veal. It's the first time I've ever eaten sweetbread. It was veal sweetbread with this kind of very rich roasted caramelly kind of, not caramel sauce, but that kind of rich deep sauce. And the dessert, I didn't like the dessert so much. It was a bit over the top. It was one of the, I can't remember. It was very creamy. I didn't like it so much. But it was like those first 3 courses, each of them, I wanted to start crying with how amazingly incredible they are. And then last year we went to the Trois Gros in Brothers.
Trois Gros.
Yeah, I'm not very good at French. And the same, birthplace of Nouvelle Cuisine, and on request they will cook you some stuff from the older menus. And so the famous dish there was salmon and sorrel. I was like looking at the menu, it was all this Asian fusion. And I was thinking, oh fuck, we'd already eaten at a 3-star place on that holiday, which has been bitterly disappointing. And I've seen the same kinds of dishes again. And the waiter said, well, if you want, we can make you salmon and sorrel. And I was like, you've got to be joking. I would love to eat salmon and sorrel. And again, it was like I wanted to start crying, Dan. It was so fucking delicious. And so with that salmon and sorrel, and they also cooked me the fillet of beef, which was in the original recipe with this incredible red wine reduction, which again was just unbelievable. And it made me realize that something happened in 3-star dining, because in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s, this is what 3-star dining tastes like. It was about flavor. It was about flavor. It was about flavors which could make you weep. And I still remember every single one of those dishes. But today, with the notable exception in the places I've been to of L'Enclume, which I think L'Enclume is incredible because it hasn't fallen into this trap. They've forgotten about flavor. This is what I think. They've forgotten about flavor in the status game with the 3-star chefs. It's all about technique. It's all about originality. It's all about provenance. And they've forgotten about smacking people around the head with incredible flavor. That's why I think, I know it's controversial, but that's my rant.
There's loads to pull out there, because I think the game of status in restaurants and storytelling, as we kind of alluded to at the beginning, is endlessly fascinating. I think ultimately what's happened with food, and I've had this as well before, I've gone to a restaurant that's in vogue, and I live in Surrey. There's a place in Teddington I went to the other day, called Shambles. It's not a bit of a shit name for a restaurant, but the food is fucking bang on. It's unreal. Yeah. If you were to serve that in one of these, hipster amazing restaurants in East London, or it's not 3-star food, it's slightly different, you'd be like, oh my God, this is insane. But because the status is less, it's not in vogue, it's not in the magazines, etc., 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 you don't get the same experience. But I think what's happened with these 3-star Michelin restaurants is that, as you said about the story equals the deal, is they're making a deal with other chefs. So they're trying to impress, with a fucking green veloute from Mars. Do you know what I mean? It's just but they've completely forgotten to make a story deal with the consumer. It's like what you want, the link between the chef and the consumer is taste. Does it taste delicious?
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's flavor, texture, and temperature. That is just those 3 things. That's like at Noma they served us this brain custard, and I don't mind eating brain custard. It's fine. Give me a brain custard, but it was grainy. The texture was grainy. It was a horrible texture, and it's like, fine, make a brain custard, but your job, Noma, the best restaurant in the world, is to make it delicious, and you have failed at that. Delicious as its flavor, texture, and temperature. The flavor was forgettable. The temperature was cold, of course, and the texture was gross. Like, it was awful, and my wife couldn't even finish it. And they kind of said to us snobbishly, "Don't you like offal?" And she said, "No, I don't mind offal. It's just the texture is grainy." And it felt like they were greatly offended that my wife was just refusing to play along with this madness.
What are some restaurants you really like in London?
In London,
do you go up to London much? Because you're Kent, aren't you?
I'm Kent. Yeah, I mean, in London, I as you can probably guess, I miss Gavroche. I used to like going to Gavroche. Because they specialised, and I interviewed him once, Michel Roux, and I said because they used to have 3-star, went down to 2, and I said, do you feel bad about missing the 3-star? And he said, no, because if you do 3-star, you've got to be all experimental. I don't want that. I want to do the classics. I want to do them perfectly. And if we do that, we're never going to get above 2. And I thought, well, that's fair enough. And so I love all that old fashioned pre-Nouvelle stuff. But in the non-Michelin space, I really like. Do you know a restaurant called Blacklock in Soho?
Mate, yeah, the chops.
Yes, really great. I mean, really inventive. I had they served me a crumpet with slow cooked lamb on top of it. It's just unbelievably delicious. And there was a sweet potato that had been cooked over ash for 11 hours. I mean, just absolutely really interesting, unusual. A crumpet with meat on it. And then you poured gravy on it. It was great. And the sweet potato. Oh, I mean,
so I've been there a couple of times. I walk out like a fat fuck, like a literally, but they do the cheesecake, the vanilla cheesecake. They come around, and this is a great example of storytelling. They could just give you a slice of cheesecake, like every other fucking restaurant. The guy comes round or the girl comes round with a big thing of cheesecake, and they just go like that. scoop it on, like, how much do you want? And I'm like, well, you have a little bit more. But I'm just, that's a beauty that, I mean, in food and restaurants, there's so many things of storytelling. But I'd love to know, so you talked about, so I interview a lot of chefs and restaurants. We've got Black Bear Burger coming on. If you ever want a banging burger, go to Black Bear Burger. I'm going up to a pizza place called Vincenzo's next week to interview this pizza guy who's just went to New York, absorbed all the pizza culture. But what the founder of Pizza Pilgrim said is that 2011 for food was a bit like 1962 for music, in that 1962 for music, you kind of had the end of, well, not the end of the war, but you had kind of, you're coming out of World War II, Vietnam's going on, there's this whole culture, these tectonic plates have just gone like that, and this explosion of kind of Beatles, Stones, Beach Boys, and then that kind of changed things. And I suppose with food, in that year, you had it's something crazy, like, this is not Michelin food, by the way, this is more kind of the floor being raised, i.e. there was no longer just shitty's easy. Do you know what I mean? You had Honest Burger, you had Patty and Bun, you had Bone Daddies, you had Blacklock is not in and around that period, but it was this change, and now food is just ubiquitous. Like, there's restaurants in London opening all the time. What do you think the role of status and storytelling, like, how have we got to this place in food where people are so maniacally obsessed with it? Like, people have podcasts about it.
It's become a status game. I mean, you know, like in the status game, I tell the story of Marco Pierre White, who, you know, like when Marco Pierre White came around, Britain quite rightly had a reputation of having just horrible food. Generally, and you know, along came Harvey's, and Britain could lay claim to the youngest chef in the world to have 3 Michelin stars. It's quite amazing. So not only was he incredibly competent, he was beautiful, he was a rock star, he was controversial. There was the book White Heat that was published, which made him look like a rock star. I mean, Anthony Bourdain said for chefs around the world, White Heat was this kind of transition point. Suddenly, being a chef was being a rock star, you know. And I think he said, you know, I can't explain to you how much impact White Heat had on the chef's world. He just turned it into this kind of rock star thing. And then how status games work in how they've always worked in the human world is that you get a high status person like Marco Pierre White, and they get surrounded by people who think, well, I wouldn't mind some of that status myself. So they start copying them, they start mimicking them, and so Marco Pierre White trains the whole generation of, you know, young chefs, most famously, of course, Gordon Ramsay. And, you know, in the status game, I quote Marco Pierre White saying Ramsay was just like, he just was copying. He was so competitive. He wanted to do what I do, dress like I do. He wanted to fish like I do. You know, he just wanted to be me. And you know, he was saying that obviously in a slightly insulting way, but that's how it works. That's how the human world works. And then, of course, you know, Gordon's come along, and what have we got now? You know, Angela Hartnett, Claire Smith, for God's sake, you know, Jason Atherton. He's trained now a whole generation of other amazing British chefs. So that's just sort of one part of the story of, like, you can see food becoming a viable status game in Britain now. Food becomes fashionable. It becomes a viable path to status, and the more status that's on offer in a particular world, the more people it's going to attract, and it becomes this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy almost. It becomes this kind of fueling fire, because the more status it offers, the more people that are going to be attracted to it. The bigger the game gets, the more status is on offer, the more people it's going to attract to it. And so we've been seeing this kind of runaway process with food in Britain, where it's becoming more and more and more and more a game in which people can earn significant amounts of status. You know, you see, like in the 90s. You know, after Marco Pierre White, you see this new rash of TV chefs, like Jamie Oliver. I know he's a bit cheesy, but you know, people like, you know, people like him coming on board and becoming celebrities. Like before Jamie Oliver, it was all, you know, TV cheffery was very it kind of was it was a bit square and cul-de-sac. It was like Delia Smith and Madder Jeffrey and, you know, the Rue brothers and things like this. And then suddenly it becomes much more younger and more youthy. So yeah, it's really, for me, it's all about the status that's on offer. The more status on offer, the more people it's going to attract. The more people it's going to attract, the greater the rewards. You know, the greater the competence, the greater the achievements, and, you know, just builds and builds and builds.
And also, I suppose the status is kind of the beacon with Marco Pierre White, but then in terms of that spreading, is social media is like pouring gasoline on that fire, and that if I get status, if I go to even if the food's wank, like going to Noma and putting it on my Instagram garners me status, and then you know it's that kind of thing.
Exactly.
For a few more, I've just selfishly got to ask you about books, mate. Because I just love reading books. And so I'd love to just kind of go for some books I'd love to ask you about. So I sometimes feel like it can be the right book, but the wrong time. And so I'd love to know, like, in your life, has there been a book that you picked up and you're like, oh, I'm bailing on this. And then you've gone back to it and you're like, oh my God, like this is the right time because you can be a different person when you read a book. Do you see what I mean?
I mean, I think I've had a habit of sort of publishing books that have been a bit early. You know, so I think The Heretics was published in 2011, and it was about how clever people can end up believing crazy things. And I think it would have been a much more impactful book 5 years later because the world started going a bit mad. 2016, 2017, 2018. So I think there's that. I think there's that idea that I feel like my books are a bit out of time in that sense.
I meant, sorry, like books you've read yourself, as in, so, you know, sometimes, so if I'm trying to think of an example of this. So the first time I read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, I was like 20. I was like, oh, this is bullshit. Like, what's this about?
Oh, I see.
But then the first time I went through a bit of adversity, I was like, I picked up again. I was like, okay, this is sick. And like, I've read it like 3 times now. Do you see? Because I think it could be book, wrong time in your life.
Yeah. I don't think I have any examples of that. Sorry.
No worries. I'd love to know, like, just in terms of epic kind of prose writing, a bit like A.A. Gill, like who are some that spring to mind in terms of just that kind of punchy, lucid, kind of hit you around the face prose? Like, who are some of those writers that speak to you?
In terms of non-fiction?
Both fiction and non-fiction, yeah, I suppose.
So, you know, we've already spoken about, you know, I'm a big fan of John Fante. I love A.A. Gill. You know, I just think he's just incredibly, he was incredibly gifted, incredibly talented. Who else is one of those ones where your mind just goes blank? Who else do I love? I mean, I'm a big fan of John Ronson in the non-fiction space. I think he's he's the best storyteller that we have in non-fiction. He's just got an absolute gift for hooking people into an incredible story and then satisfying you, you know, with incredible storytelling. So yeah, those are a few of my favorite writers. Yeah, I mean, Blake Morrison, I love When Did You Last See Your Father? I think that's a really great memoir. I like Alain de Botton as well. He's quite controversial, but I think he's just the most incredible. He writes the most incredible sentences, Alain de Botton. Why is that controversial? I think people find him quite pompous because he takes himself quite seriously. But I don't have a problem with people if he take himself quite seriously. You know, he writes about serious things. Like I don't really get that particular criticism of him. Like I don't particularly find him pompous. I just, you know, I find it. He's writing very beautiful. And then final question, because I'm just going to go and basically buy all these or watch them. But what would you? So you've got what are some of the books or the films that kind of break these rules or mesh these rules of storytelling? Like, are there any books or films that potentially spring to mind that break the rules? Or like bend, because obviously I know there's loads of different archetypes. So it's like, I'm trying to think, is there an example of someone like The Hero's Journey? Like pretty much every superhero movie plays on that, plays on those strings in some respect. I know there's like different archetypes, but are there any that kind of Yeah, I mean, there's loads. I mean, like in the Science of Storytelling, I talk in detail about Lawrence of Arabia, for example, and the novel The Remains of the Day. That those don't follow the hero's journey beats. There's no midpoint, or there's no So there's it's a bit of a myth, I think. The hero's journey is such a dated idea. There's lots of stories that don't follow those particular patterns. I mean, my favourite film, which is a film about storytelling, that breaks so many of the rules, is The Five Obstructions, which is a documentary film by Lars von Trier, and I think it's a masterpiece. If you're interested in storytelling, it's absolutely fantastic. And so one of Lars von Trier's favourite films is this kind of short black and white film. I think it's from the 60s, called The Perfect Human. I think it's called The Perfect Human or The Perfect Man. And Lars von Trier thinks it's so brilliant, this film, that it cannot be spoiled, it cannot be ruined. So he challenges the original filmmaker to remake that film 5 times, but each time Lars von Trier gives him a set of incredible challenges that he has to accept in order and remake the film. So he remakes his film The Perfect Man, I think it's called The Perfect Man, The Perfect Human, 5 times. Like one of them, for example, is you've got to go and remake this film in the worst place on earth. And he said, well, the worst place I've ever seen in my life is the red light district in Mumbai. It's like living hell. And he said, well, that's where you're going to go and remake the film. You're supposed to go and remake the film, And so and there's one where he has to remake it as an animation. He's like, oh, fucking hate cartoons. And so it's just, it doesn't follow any of the rules of storytelling, but it's absolutely gripping. And it's a wonderful piece of filmmaking. I think Lars von Trier is a genius storyteller. I think he's just an absolutely incredible instinct for telling stories.
Well, let's wrap that up there, mate, because I know you've got to run. But I've absolutely loved that. As I love being able to talk to you about food and status and storytelling. And I think, everyone listening to this, grab immediately Will's books. I'll put links in the show notes. And actually, potentially for founders who are trying to get better at that storytelling to your tribe or position your brand, Will's got a course which is the kind of, I think is it a talk? Sorry for sounding.
Yeah, it's based on my upcoming book, A Story Is a Deal, and it's about storytelling for persuasion.
I can put links to that in the show notes. Epic. Thank you so much,
Dan.
mate. Incredibly grateful.